It will create jobs in rural America, increase U.S. energy independence, and raise revenue for the U.S. Treasury. So I guess the opponents of this bill are right. If common sense solutions are your cup of tea, then I guess I can't help myself. And this is let me repeat myself and this fact, this renewable energy is at no cost to the taxpayer or the public. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentlewoman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I couldn't agree with Mr. Gosar more on some of his presentation that the Bureau it would be able to expedite some of these projects. And they are working on that categorical exemption determination to be able to understand how they can expedite some of these projects. So NEPA is not some radical piece of legislation. It was overwhelmingly approved by Congress more than 4 decades ago and signed into law by our President Nixon. It is not an obstacle. It's a tool to be used to facilitate coordination, cooperation, and public input. It is not a barrier. It is a shield protecting our communities, yours and mine, from the unintended consequences that can occur when a big, clumsy federal government acts without thinking. NEPA does not and cannot prevent projects from going forward. They just require the government to analyze alternatives and, most importantly, seek public comment. Evidence that NEPA does not stop projects is plain. Our majority cannot provide a single example where NEPA prevented one of these small projects, the hydro projects, from moving forward. Most applications are granted expeditiously and easily. It also provides the Bureau of Reclamation all the flexibility necessary to apply NEPA quickly and efficiently to the projects. There is no delay. To oppose NEPA is to oppose public input. Again, it would then oppose public input. To oppose NEPA is to oppose thinking before we act. This unnecessary and unwise blanket waiver of NEPA should be struck from this bill, and then this bill could be passed unanimously and go on to approval in our other body. And I reserve the balance of my time.
Reserves the balance of her time. Gentleman from Washington is recognized.
I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to point out what this bill does and the simplicity of this bill. In 1902, when this House, along with the other House, created the Bureau of Reclamation, which was to reclaim the land, that's where reclamation comes for, it was designed to develop areas that heretofore did not have the resources in which to develop. Mainly the resources they were lacking was water. And so the Bureau of Reclamation was created so that those arid areas, certainly my area, in central Washington qualified as that because Grand Coulee Dam is a facility that irrigates the 500,000+ acres in central Washington. But it was designed to develop in areas that couldn't be developed before. So now we have these facilities in place all over the West. They've gone through extensive environmental reviews in order to be put into place. Yet even with the technology that makes irrigation better and better and more efficient, there still is water in these canals that goes back to the river, in my case the Columbia River. Starts in the Columbia River, ends up in the Columbia River some 120, 130 miles downstream. And during that process where the water goes down to irrigate various parts of the project, we can better efficiently use that water by producing power. And that's what this legislation does. Again, we have gone through the extensive environmental review to build the ditch, the canal. We saw pictures of that earlier. All we're suggesting now is that we put something in there to capture the water power to generate electricity. It's no more complicated than that. That's all this bill is about. And so with that, while there is an objection to the NEPA process, there is an amendment that will address that, and we'll have more extensive debate on that. But I would just repeat, Mr. Chairman, all of the building of the ditches, which is really what really disturbs the land, that went through extensive environmental reviews to get to that point. We are now building within what we disturbed. boy, to say that you have to have another process, environmental process, doesn't make sense, at least to this member. And so with that, I'll yield back the time that I yielded myself and reserve the balance.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentlewoman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. How much time do we have left, sir?
The gentlewoman has 18.5 minutes, and the gentleman from Washington has 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to reiterate that we fully support the intent of the legislation without the exemption of NEPA stated on page 4, lines 12 to 15. And I must say that I have working relationships with some of my universities, and one of them, Cal Poly Pomona, has been working on hydrokinetic for a while. We've been kind of tracking the issues of hydrokinetic and some of their results, the projects that they've got in New Jersey and New York to be able to generate electricity. And we have, for at least 5 years, been trying to make Congress and the committee understand that this is something that was very viable. Even the heat off of the pumping motors is being recaptured and converted into electricity in one of my areas. So I fully understand, and I'm glad that it's finally beginning to take hold, that there is the ability to create electricity from hydro. We support the increased generation at all facilities by developing conduit and in-canal hydropower. And again, support all the provisions that stated here. But waiving NEPA does not provide the clarity and the certainty needed to be a clear process for the development of hydro at reclamation facilities. That's federal facilities only. We must ensure that the lease of power privilege, the law, is clear and does provide this specific certainty. It should be consistent with FERC process, as stated in the letter from the National Hydropower Association and American Rivers, as introduced into the record. We will be proposing an amendment to fix the problem, and we want to make this in a truly bipartisan manner. Look forward to working with my colleagues on the other side, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of her time. Gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask my friend from California if she has any more speakers on the debate portion of this.
Mr. Speaker, I do not.
If not, then I'm prepared to close, and I won't even close. I'll just yield back, and we'll start the amendment process if the gentlelady will yield back.
I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back.
I'll yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. All time for general debate has expired. Pursuant to the rule, the bill shall be considered for amendment under the 5-minute rule. The amendment in the nature of the substitute printed in the bill shall be considered as an original bill for the purpose of amendment under the 5-minute rule and shall be considered read. Each section of the committee amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be considered as read. No amendment to the committee amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be in order except 1. Those received for printing in the portion of the congressional record designated for that purpose dated at least 1 day before the date of consideration for the amendment, and 2, pro forma amendments for the purpose of debate. Each amendment so received may be offered only by the member who caused it to be printed or a designee and shall be considered as read if printed. The clerk will designate Section 1.
Section 1, short title.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
What purpose does the gentleman from Colorado rise?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 2, printed in the congressional record, offered by Mr. Tipton of Colorado.
Gentleman from Colorado is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, this is a technical amendment that changes the year of the bill from 2011 to 2012, and I ask my colleagues to support this non-controversial amendment. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Does any member seek recognition?
No, Mr. Chair, we have no objection.
The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Colorado. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Clerk will designate Section 2.
Section 2, authorization.
Are there any amendments to Section 2?
At the desk, Mr. Speaker.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Printed in the congressional record, offered by Mrs. Napolitano of California.
The gentlewoman from California is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Simple amendment, striking out language in Section 2, page 4, lines 12 to 15, removes the exemption of NEPA waiver for small conduits on federal land. The proponents of this measure again will argue that FERC regulations allow for categorical exemption for certain conduit hydropower projects that meet statutory and regulatory criteria and do not have the potential for significant environmental impacts. This is true. FERC's treatment of conduits is not the same. It is not the same as what the legislation attempts, where all environmental regards are completely waived. This bill, 2842, as amended, proposes to totally exempt all small hydro from FERC exemption process. Reclamation already has the same authority as FERC to develop a process of complying with NEPA. Reclamation has already been in the process of investigating whether small hydropower developed in conduits or canals may be appropriately placed under categorical exemption. And as I've stated before, they plan to have the drafts already out. They're consulting with developers and irrigators to make sure that this bill is what they need. They have also granted specific categorical exemptions to 3 LOP projects as mentioned in my opening statement. Low-impact hydropower can be efficiently developed by utilizing existing environmental review provisions. We have seen examples of projects that have not unduly delayed project development, and I again point to the 3 projects as stated before utilizing the LOP process. I have placed the letters from National Hydropower Association, from the American Rivers, and others to highlight the views of the hydropower industry and the leading conservation group on hydropower. Both are supportive of 2042 as long as it is modeled after the process used by FERC. It would provide for proper oversight, a long-standing practice FERC has shown. And I urge my colleagues to vote positively yes on this amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady may not reserve the balance of her time. Gentlewoman, does the
I'm sorry,
gentlewoman yield back?
I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Colorado rise?
Move to strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think our opponents on this piece of legislation are confused as to actually what the debate is truly about. If it is about jobs, if it is about the American people, if it is about providing energy certainty, if it is about reducing the carbon footprint in this country, 2842 is a good piece of legislation. They say conceptually they embrace it, but they want to put on the backs of hard-working Americans more cost, more uncertainty at a time when we need to create certainty, when we need to be able to have that opportunity to be able to reduce costs. Our opponent had commented that we see no evidence that projects are being delayed. Well, the fact of the matter is, when we had testimony, Chris Trees, Colorado Water District, noted that it took well over a year for a project to be approved. Many projects were not being considered simply because of the regulatory costs. When we look at this chart on a projected cost to build a small hydropower installation, the actual cost to build a unit is $20,000. By the time that we concur with our Democrats' colleagues' insistence that we expand bureaucracy, have more government, we're going to add an additional $50,000 in cost. What's the challenge? For rural America, it is dollars. We have struggling communities, people that need jobs, people that need to be able to be put back to work. It may in big cities not be big money when you start to talk about $50,000, but for our small water districts, it truly is. This is a chance to stand up for the American people. This is a chance to be able to create clean energy for this nation. You know, when we look at examples in terms of what does over-regulation by the government do, When we went through the NEPA process, no one argued, as we had photos that my colleague Mr. Gosar had shown of constructed ditches made by men were put into place to have the NEPA process. But then to duplicate that process, we can look at Bureau of Reclamation's process, in which it took 5 years for it to find out that it even had jurisdiction over the Klamath Project Sea Drop Canal in order to pave the way for conduit hydropower. 5 years. Join with us in caring about the environment to make sure that we're going to be delivering clean hydropower, not delaying it for 5 years, not delaying it for a year, not putting more cost on the backs of the American people when they simply can't afford it, and putting people back to work. That's the choice we have on this legislation. As Chairman Hastings has noted, it's a common sense piece of legislation. It makes sense, and it makes good common sense to vote for it.
Does the gentleman yield?
I will certainly yield to my colleague.
I thank the gentleman. You got to stand. I thank the gentleman for yielding, and you'd put that poster back up again. That I think, real-life example demonstrates why America is so fed up with what happens in Washington, D.C. Here is a project that is affordable at $20,000, and so there, somebody wants to take that opportunity to perhaps make some money. Nothing wrong with that in our country. And you find out that the cost of regulations is 2.5 times what the project is. Now, what certainty does that send to the marketplace that we want to do business? I mean, that is absolutely incredible. And it's environmental permitting costs here in this particular example, which of course is exemplified by what? NEPA. And this amendment would take the waiver of NEPA out of the equation. In other words, under the bill that you have offered, correct me if I'm wrong, that red dot, that red slice there would be dramatically reduced. Is that correct? And I'll yield back to the gentleman.
That is correct. Now yield back.
From California, rise. Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, this amendment, as the gentlelady's pointed out, strikes the NEPA exemption for small hydroelectric projects. Perhaps she hasn't been listening to the debate for the last hour. The NEPA exemption is the entire point of the bill. As our subcommittee heard earlier this year, it's precisely this duplicative, costly, time-consuming, and entirely unnecessary process that is more than double the cost of small hydro projects, which simply makes them cost prohibitive. They don't apply for permits because they know they don't pencil out once all of the studies are factored into their costs. The Bureau of Reclamation doesn't deny permits. It simply demands such costly environmental studies as to make these projects cost prohibitive. The bill authorizes these projects so they don't have to go through the costly, time-consuming, and pointless environmental studies. The gentlelady several times mentioned the fact that the Bureau of Reclamation was moving ahead with 3 permits in Colorado. So what's the problem? Well, let's look at those 3 permits. One of these wasn't conduit hydropower. One was specifically approved by Congress in the 1980s. And the third took a full year to get the permitting done on an existing canal outlet. Now, if that's what the gentlelady describes as success, I think she has just proven our point. Let me ask her this. What is the point of requiring expensive, time-consuming environmental reviews when all you're doing is putting a small generator in an existing Bureau of Reclamation pipe that has already undergone extensive environmental reviews? FERC already provides for the categorical exemption on non-federal projects. The Bureau's own NEPA manual, updated a decade ago, clearly allows categorical exemptions for, quote, and this is from their manual, quote, minor construction activities associated with authorized projects which merely augment or supplement or are enclosed within existing facilities. These small hydro generators precisely meet this requirement. The problem is the agency ignores its own guidelines. That is precisely why this bill is necessary. Mr. Chairman, either placing generators in pipelines is environmentally damaging or it's not, and anybody with a lick of sense already knows the answer to that question, and I would expect them to be supporting the bill of the gentleman from Colorado. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purposes the gentleman from Arizona rise?
I would like to strike the last word, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I rise against the amendment from the gentlelady from California. In fact, I want to highlight two of the Arizona witnesses who have some of the most applicable understanding of this hydropower bill. The first person I would like to quote is Mr. Bob Lynch, in which he testified, "We need Congress to streamline the processes, both for reclamation facilities and for non-federal facilities. This companion enterprise will open up the West to a whole new product line of small hydropower facilities that can tap the energy and flowing water that is currently being wasted. If the red tape can be cut down, the cost of installing these units can be amortized. These are existing facilities and will have no impact other than to provide additional clean, renewable hydropower in small quantities all over the western United States." The second person I would like to highlight is Mr. Grant Ward, who represents one of these districts, in which he testified how the permitting costs, really $50,000 for every small conduit hydropower unit in his area, are more expensive than the actual installation of $20,000. So here we hear from Mr. Bob Lynch, representing the Irrigation and Electrical Irrigation Districts Association of Arizona, someone who has countless decades of experience and expertise in these issues, as well as Mr. Grant Ward, who experiences on the ground level, dictating exactly their testimony. So I rise in opposition to this amendment. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from California. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
Recorded vote requested, please.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from California will be postponed. Are there any additional amendments to Section 2? The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 3, printed in the congressional record, offered by Mr. Ellison of Minnesota.
Gentleman from Minnesota is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our transportation program expires at the end of March, and we're still facing high unemployment. Why aren't we working on a real jobs bill that'll create good infrastructure jobs? The GOP has wasted about 427 days since they've been in charge by not producing a real jobs agenda. But it's around transportation and infrastructure where we have real opportunity. Unfortunately, certain people have used creative titles, deceiving titles in some cases, to try to distract the public. Their transportation bill is called the American Energy and Infrastructure Jobs Act. But it wouldn't promote jobs in energy or infrastructure. It actually cut highway investment by $16 billion in 5 years. This would mean a loss of 500,000 jobs nationwide. That's right. The American Energy and Infrastructure Jobs Act would cut 500,000 jobs. The bill would cost about 11,000 jobs in my home state of Minnesota. Today we're debating, quote, the Bureau of Reclamation Small Conduit Hydropower Development and Rural Jobs Act. Why are we talking about small conduit hydropower when we need investment in highways, bridges, transit, and airports? Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not here to run down small conduit hydropower. I just think it's too small. Also on the floor this week is the so-called Jumpstart Our Business Startups Act, JOBS. This is a rehash of access to capital bills that may be useful. In fact, I may support them, but will barely make a dent in our unemployment numbers. The GOP may have creative titles, may have some titles that catch attention and sound good, but if you scratch the surface just a little bit, there's no jobs agenda, even in bills that say jobs. The American Society of Civil Engineers is a group that knows a little bit about infrastructure. This is a group collection of professionals who knows the issue, and they give our infrastructure grade a D. And D don't stand for dandy. It stands for downright bad and unfortunate. We have nearly 70,000 bridges across this country, or 11.5% of all highway bridges classified structurally deficient, meaning they require significant maintenance or replacement. There are about 1,400 structurally deficient bridges in my state of Minnesota, several within walking distance of my home. In 2007, my district tragically felt the impact of deficient bridges with the collapse of I-35W. We lost 13 lives, and 100 people ended up with serious injury in the hospital. We need a real transportation bill and a real jobs agenda to rebuild our infrastructure and to put Americans back to work. Well, so I'd like to yield now to Eddie Bernice Johnson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Pardon me. The gentleman must remain standing while he is yielding time. Thank you. Gentlewoman's recognized.
Thank you very much. And let me thank the gentleman from Minnesota for leading this position. I rise today to speak about the current extension of the transportation bill, which is set to expire at the end of this month. And I'm frustrated by the lack of action in this chamber and the lack of attention being paid by the majority of the American people who desperately need these jobs. The current transportation authorization expires at the end of March, but we're still facing high unemployment and a weak economy. We need the kind of long-term transportation policy that will repair our crumbling infrastructure and bring back good-paying construction jobs. I've been on the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee for 20 years this year, and up until now, the committee has worked in a bipartisan fashion, and we've produced sound common sense legislation. But the progress that could have been made has been stymied by partisan bickering and bad policy. The current transportation bill offered by the majority would cut investment in our nation's highways by almost $16 billion over the next 5 years. This would mean a loss of over 500,000 jobs nationwide. Mr. Speaker, we talk about this being the jobs bill. What is before us is the job-killing bill. But the American people are waiting.
Gentleman yields back.
You can strike the last
What purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to strike the last word.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
To claim time in opposition.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, this amendment would give to the Secretary of the Interior the ability literally to unilaterally veto this measure if he finds it would result in a loss of jobs. Now, let's be clear what we're talking about here. This is the same Secretary of the Interior who came to the Natural Resources Committee in 2009 when federal water diversions in California's Central Valley were throwing thousands and thousands of farm workers into unemployment. And before the committee, he admitted that he had the authority to stop the diversions and stop throwing these thousands of hardworking families into poverty, but that he chose not to do so because, he said, it would be like admitting failure. This is the same administration that blissfully threw thousands of Gulf oil workers into unemployment by declaring a de facto moratorium on oil production in the Gulf. This is the same administration that's blocking energy development in the Arctic tundra. This is the same administration that's torpedoed the Keystone Pipeline and the thousands of jobs it would have created. And now the gentleman from Minnesota would give this same official and this same administration the power to shut down small hydroelectric facilities that could add thousands of megawatts of additional electricity to our energy supplies. I would assure the gentleman that the reason for this bill is because we fully expect it to produce a quantum leap in demand for small generators and somebody's going to have to build them, and somebody's going to have to install them. That means more jobs. Now, if the gentleman is worried about jobs being lost in the regulatory bureaucracy because they won't have as many businesses to harass, I can assure him they have demonstrated over the years a tremendous creativity in finding new businesses to harass and new reasons to increase their budgets. But I say again, I don't believe it would be a good idea to put in the hands of this Secretary and this administration yet another tool to obstruct energy and job development. Now, high electricity prices might not be a problem in Minnesota, but I can assure the gentleman they are a serious problem in California, and that's why his amendment is so dangerous. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. What purpose does the gentlewoman from Texas rise?
Strike the last word.
Gentlewoman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The bill that I'm speaking of is called the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee bill. The Secretary of Transportation, who has served on this committee, has clearly explained what this bill in its present form will do for this country. Now, I know that probably no one wants to quote this particular secretary who has had inside experience as well as outside experience. And he is very aware, because he served on this committee during the time we worked in a bipartisan fashion. And, you know, we're talking about highways, and because some want to put a lot more extracurricular, extraneous kind of stuff in this bill that does not relate to these highways, then they're against it. But the progress that could have been made was really stymied by this very kind of propaganda and bad policy. The current transportation bill offered by the majority would cut investment in our nation's highways and kill jobs. We want to create jobs and do something about the crumbling infrastructure in this country. Mr. Speaker, the American people are waiting for us to do something. We were sent here by our constituents to solve problems, not to create them, and not to find excuses to face the real reality. So let's get back to work and produce a transportation bill that will repair our nation's infrastructure and get thousands of Americans back to work, not to try to challenge this administration because you don't like the administration. We want to see something that's real and something that addresses the real problem, and not skirt around it with a lot of ideas and a lot of propaganda that simply does not relate to this bill. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington rise?
I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I find this debate rather interesting, because the gentlelady from Texas that spoke, of course, did not speak on this bill. She spoke on another piece of pending legislation that dealt with jobs. That's good. That pending piece of legislation, I might add, had two components to it. It had the energy component, and it had the transportation component, which of course is pending. We know that expires at the end of this month. But we did pass the energy component of that bill, which creates over, tens of thousands of jobs. And I just want to point out, Mr. Chairman, the gentlelady voted against that piece of legislation. So sometimes we hear mixed messages here, but I just wanted to set the record straight. This bill is another extension of energy production and, of course, creating American energy jobs. And with that, I find the gentleman from Minnesota's amendment really very interesting, because what he is saying by his amendment, unless the bureaucracy decides, by giving all this authority to the Secretary, and by the way, I'm not sure which Secretary it is because it's not delineated in the amendment, but leaving that aside, he is saying there will be no jobs unless what? The bureaucracy decides there will be jobs. Now, how ludicrous is that? But that is precisely where we seem to be today, and I think this is, as I mentioned earlier, this is one of the reasons why I think Americans are so fed up with what's happening here in D.C. with this sort of back and forth. Let me repeat. This is infrastructure that is in place. There is water running through this infrastructure. All we're trying to do is capture that energy at no cost to the federal government. and create jobs and lower the cost of energy. It doesn't get more, it's nothing more simplistic than that, Mr. Chairman. So I urge my colleagues to vote no on this amendment, and I urge my colleagues to vote yes on the underlying bill, and I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. What purpose does the gentleman from Colorado rise?
I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, it's interesting. Our colleagues do talk about jobs. We want to be able to create jobs, to be able to facilitate that opportunity for Americans to be able to go back to work, to be able to create clean energy right here in the United States. As my colleague was pointing out, a common sense piece of legislation. We're going through existing conduits, what we call in our part of the world ditches, to be able to capture that energy, to be able to deliver it, to allow local decisions to be able to be made, but our colleagues seem to want to make sure that we're standing up, or they are standing up, for the status quo, and that just means say no. Say no to clean energy. No, join with us and support clean energy and hydroelectric power. You're saying no to jobs. Join with us to be able to create jobs right here in this country and be able to put our people back to work. We have enough red tape. This amendment will simply grow more government, and as we saw from testimony in our committee and charts that have been shown during this debate, there's no need to put more expense on the backs of the American people who simply cannot afford your stand to build more government. This is an amendment that deserves to be rejected. I ask for that and ask for a favorable vote on 2842. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Minnesota. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to. What purpose does the gentleman from Washington rise?
I move the committee to now rise.
The question is on the motion that the committee rise. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the committee rises.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Speaker, the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union, having had under consideration H.R. 2842, directs me to report that it has come to no resolution thereon.
The Chair of the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union reports that that committee has had under consideration H.R. 2842 and has come to no resolution thereon. The Chair lays before the House an enrolled bill.
Senate 1710, an act to designate the United States Courthouse located at 222 West 7th Avenue, Anchorage, Alaska, as the James M. Fitzgerald United States Courthouse.
The Chair will now entertain requests for 1 minute. What purpose does the gentleman from Indiana rise? Without objection. House will be in order. Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
We are told to mourn with those who mourn and grieve with those who grieve. And Mr. Speaker, I rise to do so today. Across southern Indiana in small towns like Henryville, Marysville, Pekin, and others, Hoosier families and communities are picking up the pieces after one of the most devastating tornadoes in my lifetime swept through our state. I come to the House floor today to pay tribute to the lost and to those who lost their homes and their businesses, to pay tribute to the first responders and to the countless thousands of Hoosiers who have come alongside their neighbors in this grievous hour. As millions of Americans have witnessed on television, these violent storms left utter destruction in their wake across the three-state area. Schools, businesses, and homes were reduced to piles of rubble. Cars were flipped and thrown about as if they were toys. Some communities, as one local official said it, were, quote, completely gone. In the Hoosier State, we lost 13 lives, including an entire family from Pekin, Indiana. Yet in this dark hour, for so many families, as is always the case in the Hoosier State, we hear stories of communities coming together to rebuild. Despite the snow and cold that followed the storms, we see generosity, community spirit in full display. Over the coming days, weeks, and months, the wounds will heal, debris will be cleared, homes and businesses and barns will be rebuilt. And as the federal government makes its assessment today about federal support, we look forward to supporting all federal assistance. But I rise today to commend Governor Daniels, the Indiana National Guard, the Indiana State Police, all of our first responders and Homeland Security and community leaders for their decisive leadership in this moment. But I also rise today to commend all of those who step forward to provide a helping hand, either with time or talent or treasure. Volunteers donating food and clothing and labor is profoundly inspiring and humbling and makes me proud to be a Hoosier. May God comfort the families of the lost and give strength and courage to those who will rebuild in the wake of these storms. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Are there any further requests for 1-minute speeches? Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5, 2011, the gentlewoman from Virgin Islands, Ms. Christensen, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, as you heard, the House, the Congress as a whole, the 10th District of New Jersey, our nation, the countries of Africa and the Caribbean, of Ireland, where he was an honorary citizen, and indeed the world has suffered a great loss. Donald Payne was a friend and advocate for the world and all of its people, but particularly for the sons of Africa here and worldwide. Tonight I'm honored to chair this special order in his honor and to recognize my colleagues from both sides of the aisle who will be coming to pay tribute to Donald Payne. And I'd like to begin by asking unanimous consent that all members might have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on the topic of the special order.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. And I'd like to begin by yielding 2 minutes to the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Ellison.
Mr. Speaker, Donald Payne had played a very special role in my service as a member of Congress. I didn't know him nearly as long as many other members, and I guess I probably didn't know him as well, but there's no doubt that as a member coming into Congress trying to figure out how to be the best member I could be, Donald Payne was one of the people who I admired and looked to, and no more so than when he was fighting for the human rights of all people. Donald Payne gave me a new and unique perspective on suffering in Darfur, explaining the complexities as it related to making sure that Darfurians not only got relief but also eventually one day would get justice. But he didn't stop there. I have a large percentage of my constituents who hail from Somalia, and Donald Payne gave me historic perspective on Somalia on a regular basis, which I didn't have, and also again helped me understand how difficult it was, but how important it also was that we stand for stability for the people of Somalia. In fact, his level of commitment to the people of Somalia was so great, he got into an airplane, flew there, and on his way out was actually shot at when al-Shabaab tried to take his life for showing concern for the people. But yeah, he traveled many places and really went all around the world, but he also went into my district, as he went to many districts. And I'll never forget the day when we organized a community forum on East Africa. We had Somalis in the room, people from the Ogaden region of Ethiopia, people from Eritrea, all over, immigrants who made America their home either by choice or because they were refugees. And for 3 straight hours, Donald Payne answered their questions, gave them comfort and assurance and information. And he is a towering figure in my world, and I don't think we'll ever forget Donald Payne. And I just say, may he rest in peace, and God bless him and his family. And yield back.
Thank you, Congressman Ellison. And now I'd like to yield 2 minutes to Mr. Wolf of Virginia.
I thank the gentlelady, ask unanimous consent to revise and extend. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to pay tribute to the life and legacy of Congressman Donald Payne. As a public service servant, Congressman Payne has consistently stood with the forgotten people and causes. He has championed their plight and advocated on their behalf, perhaps none more so than the long-suffering people of southern Sudan. For years, Congressman Payne advocated for self-determination for the people of South Sudan who endured great hardship at the hands of the government in Khartoum. He was also the leading voice in urging states in the U.S. to divest from companies doing business in Sudan in light of the government's horrific human rights abuses. Congressman Payne was the sponsor of the congressional resolution calling attention to the horrors unfolding in Darfur, a resolution which rightly labeled this tragedy genocide. The list goes on and on. I had the honor of being with Congressman Payne in Nairobi, Kenya in 2005 for the historic signing of the Comprehensive Peace Agreement, which marked the end of a brutal civil war between the North and the South, which spanned 21 years and claimed the lives of more than 2 million people. Congressman Payne labored for years to see that day arrive. No one did more than Don Payne to bring about the new country, which is now the country of Southern Sudan. He fittingly returned to South Sudan in July of 2011 to join the people of that land in celebrating their long-awaited independence, a fulfillment of the promise. Upon being chosen to be part of the official U.S. delegation, Congressman Payne issued the following statement. He said, as a ranking member on the House Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on Africa, Global Health, and Human Rights, I have been committed to helping Sudan achieve peace and justice. Indeed, he was committed. Congressman Payne worked hard. He traveled to the region countless times. He experienced the people suffering, and then he acted. Congressman Payne heard the people suffering and never chose to look the other way. My thoughts and prayers are with the Congressman Payne's family as they grieve. The Congress will profoundly miss his voice, as will thousands of others around the world. And I yield back the balance of my time. I thank the gentleman.
Thank you, Congressman Wolf. Next, I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the Congresswoman from Texas, Congresswoman Eddie Bernice Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my colleague from the Virgin Islands. I rise to speak today about the loss of Congressman Donald Payne. Congressman Payne lost his battle with cancer early this morning, and we in Congress lost an esteemed colleague. My relationship and acquaintance with Congressman Payne came before I came to Congress, and meeting him when he served on the National YMCA Board and became the chair of the National YMCA Board. And I know him as a devoted public servant who used his position in Congress to advocate for those less fortunate, first as a teacher and later serving on the House Committee on Education and Workforce, and he was an advocate for children and worked to make college more affordable. As the highest-ranking Democrat on the Foreign Affairs Subcommittee of Africa, Global Health and Human Rights worked to promote human rights around the world and help secure billions of dollars in foreign aid for treating HIV, AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria. It is difficult to lose a member of the Congressional Black Caucus family. We're small but very connected. And Congressman Payne served the 10th District of New Jersey with dedication and served as the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus as well. My thoughts and prayers are with his family today in this difficult time. I yield back.
Thank you, Congresswoman Johnson. And now I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the Congresswoman from the District of Columbia, Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding and for leading this special order for our good friend and colleague, Donald Payne, whose passing leaves me shocked and deeply saddened after 12 terms of outstanding service in the House of Representatives. Don was a friend. He was more than a colleague. He was the kind of friend you could always strike up a conversation with about matters technical or just matters at hand. Because Don was easy of manner but strong of conviction. Don turned out to be a real path breaker and history maker. He came to Congress as the first African American to serve in Congress from the state of New Jersey. He followed the great Peter Rodino, who had served Newark for decades. Newark had become a majority African American city, but Don grew up in a neighborhood that was as Italian as it was black and felt comfortable with people of all ethnic groups. When Congressman Rodino, who was then chair of the House Judiciary Committee, retired, this was, of course, before I came to Congress, but it was much commented upon. Don, who had run against him several times, indeed was the logical person to win that election, and he plunged into his work for a city that needed a man of his depth of understanding and conviction of their problems, their education, their health care, their housing needs. For Newark, when the congressman came here 12 terms ago, what personified, symbolized the great urban communities of our city and the upheavals that they were undergoing. He understood that, and he plunged into that work, and yet he was able at the same time to become perhaps the House's most expert member on Africa and the Caribbean. He was a leader in Africa who did not work from the newspapers or the journals, but traveled the continent and came back and information for the Congressional Black Caucus. Don was the go-to man. Nobody from the caucus moved on a matter affecting Africa without going to Don first. Go to the expert first, find out if you're on the right foot, and then perhaps move forward. Don was rigorous in his evaluation of the leadership of the various countries of Africa. He never withered when an African leader needed the strong criticism of the United States and his own strong criticism, and thus his leadership was trusted all across the Congress when he stepped forward with his views. He worked with every president, because Republican and Democratic presidents alike have been ensconced in the issues affecting Africa, and they, like us, turned to Don on those issues. Where will we find such a member today? Is there such a member who has devoted so much of his life not only to urban America, but especially to Africa, who knew everything, knew everyone, and knew anything we needed to know? Don will be greatly missed by this chamber. He will always be remembered. I know I speak for us all when I say that his family has our deepest sympathy and our everlasting love. I yield back to the lady. Appreciate the time.
Thank you, Congresswoman. I'd like to yield now 2 minutes to one of Donald's colleagues from New Jersey, Congressman Holt.
I thank the gentlelady. Mr. Speaker, all of us are saddened by the country's loss of Don Payne. and it's going to be hard to get used to the absence of Don. Don's been a good friend to me, someone I've looked up to here in Congress. No one in Congress has been a stronger advocate for equality of opportunity in education. No one in Congress has been a greater advocate for children's services and youth development. No one has been more knowledgeable about Africa. No one has voted more consistently for peaceful and non-military resolutions to problems. No one has been more consistent in the fight to respect workers' safety and workers' conditions. And throughout all of this, he's been very attentive. Don Payne was very attentive to the interests of the entire state of New Jersey and especially to the interests of his constituents. He was instrumental in bringing international attention and condemnation to the genocide in Darfur, as we've heard already. As a former educator, he brought an invaluable perspective to our work together on the Education Committee. He was responsible for getting many millions of dollars to the PEPFAR program for dealing with HIV, resistant TB, malaria around the world, especially in Africa. And I might add, he did that with President Bush. He was a strong advocate for an adequate minimum wage. He was a key player in writing the College Cost Reduction and Access Act to cut interest rates for college loans, to increase Pell Grants, to provide loan forgiveness to public service employees with student debt. It was a great pleasure and really a marvel to watch him on the Education and Labor Committee. Don was, I think you would say, an unabashed liberal, recognizing that there are some things that we can do better together than separately. He was not a you're-on-your-own kind of guy. And that was true in person, too. Very inclusive, good humor, and dignity in everything he did. Don Payne was a good friend, a good member of this House, a great public servant. My thoughts and prayers are with his family and his many friends, and I know his constituents will be hard-pressed to find somebody to represent them as well as Don Payne did. I yield back.
Thank you, Congressman Holt. And now I'd like to yield 2 minutes to another colleague from New Jersey, Congressman Frelinghuysen.
I thank the gentlewoman for yielding. Don Payne and I have been friends for over 35 years. We served together in the county government as freeholders in New Jersey from our respective counties, Morris and Essex County, before he preceded me to Congress. During his service in this House, he worked long and hard on issues that literally cried out for attention. At home, we all admired his steadfast commitment to ensuring that our nation's children had the best quality education possible. Abroad, he focused on global public health, issues like childhood survival and human rights on the continent of Africa and elsewhere. Don Payne took up the cause for suffering people around the world and gave voice to their plight, even at great personal risk. Mr. Speaker, Don Payne loved Congress. He loved public service. He loved New Jersey, and he loved his hometown of Newark. I was proud to work with him to revitalize the Passaic River in Newark, that waterfront that for many years had remained inaccessible to the public. Don will be sorely missed, especially for his dedicated service to his constituents over many decades. I'll never forget his valuable service and his enduring friendship. We've lost a great principled man who lived a life from which we could all learn something. May the tributes and prayer of so many of his colleagues here this afternoon today be a source of strength to his family. And I yield back the balance of my time. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us and for offering those words on behalf of Congressman Payne. I'd now like to yield 2 minutes to the Congresswoman from California, another dear friend of Congressman Payne's, Lynn Woolsey.
Mr. Speaker, I raised to pay tribute to a man I loved, a man I respected, a friend for life, and a mentor. When I came to Congress, I couldn't have picked a better mentor. A public school teacher from New Jersey, someone kind and smart, dedicated, actually burning in his belly about issues of value and conscience. I served on Congressman Payne's Africa subcommittee. He served on my Workforce Protection subcommittee. On both panels, I benefited from his wisdom, advice, and his expertise. On the Africa subcommittee, I was always amazed at how much and who he knew. This was a man who knew what public service was all about. He was, as he described himself, a mild-mannered man, but he was also tenacious, dedicated, and stubborn. No one has worked harder to bring peace, democracy, and human rights to Africa. He almost gave his life for the cause a few years ago when his plane was shot by rebels as he prepared to come home after a Somalia mission that actually the State Department had warned him against. As change continues, and as change continues to come particularly to Africa in the coming years, we'll all remember the role that Donald Payne played in laying the groundwork and helping make that change happen. A true statesman and a humanitarian, Donald's death this morning already leaves an indescribable void. Donald Payne had a huge heart and a keen mind, and believe me, I will